Hello, everyone. Welcome to Radio Woodstock, the Facebook page, the sofa series. Right? Isn't this nice? From my sofa to yours. I am Lorraine Goldbloom, and I am here today to talk to you about vortex healing. I teach something called vortex healing, divine energy healing, and usually to help people understand the nature of it and the magic of it, I tend to do live healing events. The most effective way for people to get a sense of what vortex healing is really about is to have a direct experience of it. So you'll see me doing live healing events where I will talk about different issues and offer healing. Unfortunately, in this format, I'm not able to do that today. But I thought it might be important to just talk about the nature of healing. You know, before we talk about the specifics of what vortex healing is or why it works so effectively, I think it's important to understand what we're trying to heal from and what we're looking for when we look to healing. I mean, we usually look to healing because we're in some kind of pain, right? We have some kind of issue. We're in physical pain, emotional pain, psychological trauma. And often, on one level, we're looking for just simply relief. But I'm going to suggest that the deeper sense of healing is when we can find a return to wholeness, because our issues really keep us in an experience of separation. So to understand the nature of healing, I think first it's important to understand the nature of an issue and what we're looking to be healed from. So when I talk about issues, I'm talking about anything that keeps you in an experience. That's what an issue is. Anything that keeps you in an experience of separation and anything that keeps you out of being present. That's what our issues do. On a physical level, on an emotional level, on a psychological level, issues keep us distracted and in some kind of story of ourselves. For example, as part of the issue series, something that I'm working on, we explore in depth the issue of anxiety. Anxiety is a great issue. And by great, I mean awful. By great example of an issue, I mean difficult. Because an issue like anxiety manifests in many different ways. If you struggled with anxiety, you know that it's not just an emotional issue, that anxiety has a physical manifestation. It has an emotional manifestation. It shows up psychologically. It really keeps you in a very difficult experience. And that's what our issues do. They are complicated and difficult to work with because they have many different ways that they express themselves. One really good issue is going to show up in the body, in the chakra system, different parts of the energy system, like the energetic pathways and meridians. It's going to show up in our experience of self, and it's going to condition the form. We use that word in healing, don't we? Conditioning. And that's to speak of where an issue shows up. You can actually point to it. You can say, that hurts. That's keeping me distracted. That's how issues condition us. But that's not all of it. It gets harder because an issue also has a consciousness component to it, doesn't it? There is a consciousness component to our issues that keeps us in an experience of ourselves, right? We don't just say, oh, I have anxiety affecting my body and energy system. We say, I am anxious. We don't say, oh, I have depression that's affecting my interactions with other people. We say, I am depressed. I am sick. Our issues hold us on a consciousness level, and we identify with them. We identify with them to the point where we experience them as part of ourselves. That's what our issues do. So in order for a healing modality to be effective, we have to be able to address the conditioning component. We have to be able to address all of the ways that an issue shows up in the body and in the energy system and the psychology and all of that. And then we also have to get this consciousness component. We have to get to the place where we believe I am anxious, I am depressed, I am fill in the blank. And we have to help to wake our consciousness up out of that experience. That's what healing is. It's a return to wholeness on all levels. And here's another thing about issues, is that our deepest issues, our hardest ones, are often the ones that we don't even know we have. One of my first profound experiences with Vortex Healing was when I was already a student, right? And I was taking a healing class. And to be honest with you, I just started taking classes because I thought it was interesting and fun. I personally had no ambition to work as a healer, much less to become a teacher. I was just curious. And I was very impressed with the founder of Vortex Healing, Rick Weinman, and how he taught and what he offered. And I thought the tools were very powerful. And in one class, I was having this odd experience where my stomach was distended. It was sort of bloated. And it wasn't uncomfortable really, but it was odd. And I couldn't figure out what was going on. And so I went up and I asked him during a break, I asked the teacher, Rick Weinman, you know, there's something weird going on with my stomach. And he tuned into me and he said, oh, that's your lungs. Why don't you go and do some vortex healing work on your lungs? And I said, okay. And to be honest with you, that didn't really make sense to me at the time. I didn't really have any frame of reference or how one would be connected to the other. But he seemed to know what he was talking about, and so I did. And a couple days later, I was receiving healing from a friend. And what was interesting was that I wasn't really feeling much during the session itself, except when we got to the final part of the healing that was more of an integration phase. You know, at that point, I had gotten used to the feel of the energy moving and all of that. But for whatever reason, I wasn't able to sort of feel the session until we got to the end part, the integration. And I remember saying to the friend who was working on me at the end of the session, I'm concerned because it feels as if I couldn't breathe. You know, I wasn't able to breathe. Now I could, but I had this sensation that I couldn't breathe. And very quickly, Rick came over. And I remember him I was lying on the floor, and I remember him looking down at me, saying, are you okay? And I said, well, I don't think I'm gonna die, but it feels as if I can't breathe. And he looked at me carefully, and he said, oh, that's your lung thing. And he turned to my partner who had done the work and he said, good work. And he walked away. And then was the realization in the sense that I started to cry. And not just kind of a mature self-awareness cry, a like full-blown meltdown, sobbing release, not out of those kind of meltdown release. And it took me a bit of time to piece together what had happened. But what had happened was that I had an issue in my lungs that was stopping the energy flow of the body. And where things weren't moving in the upper part of my body, the lungs, things stagnated in the belly, and the belly got distended, right? When one part of the body stagnates, there's a buildup, blockage, stagnation in the other part, and that's what was going on with my abdomen. In short, it was my lungs. And for those of you who are familiar with Chinese medicine, the lungs tend to represent unresolved sadness or grief. So what this vortex healing session did for me was it uncovered this layer of loss that I didn't even know that I had. And that's incredible, because what I realized as I went back into my life and began to apply this work was that level of loss actually was keeping me from engaging from life on a certain level. And by life, I mean all of my relationships and everything in it. I kind of made a decision when I was younger that I'm never going to get married, right? It's too children, no, too much, too messy. And the fact of the matter is, these choices I was making at the time, these weren't free will choices. These were conditioned responses, right? These were conditioned responses by someone who had suffered great loss and was too terrified to ever experience that level of loss again. And it took a kind of healing to address an issue, not just on an emotional level and a psychological level, but on a physical level, to help me find the space where I could begin to open again. And so from that one healing, my whole life changed. Even though loss is still something that I work with, my relationship to that issue was never the same. Because the moment that I realized that I had it as an issue, I wasn't as identified with it. Then it's something that can be worked with. It's the difference from, having it in your face and having it be very difficult, to having it so deeply set inside your system, you don't even know it's there. This is the first step to freedom. So those are issues. They can be very, very hard to work with. A lot of the issues that we're seeing now in terms of the COVID-19 lockdown, a lot of us are seeing, issues that we've already had that are just being magnified due to circumstances. Anxiety is a very common issue. Depression is a very common issue. That whole fear of the unknown, where we just don't know what's going to happen. That's kind of always there, but then suddenly we have the circumstances that justify our issues, and they're all in our face, which is incredibly uncomfortable. At the same time, it is an opportunity for healing, because you can meet these issues and you can work with them on a consciousness level and on an energetic level. So let me tell you a little bit about why vortex healing works on these components. So vortex healing is a healing modality. All right, it works on these levels. And what happens when you take the foundational training is you receive what's called a transmission, right? So transmission is a term, I think it goes back to Buddhist terminology, but it's basically the passing on of the ability to do the work from the teacher to the student. It's kind of a communication from one system, energy system, to another about how to do the work. The transmission in the Vortex Healing foundational level class is 5 full days long. That's why our foundational training is 5 full days. So what happens during the course of the 5 days, people receive what we call the vortex wheel, right? Which is really an energetic consciousness structure that sits in the heart center. We call it a wheel because from the front, if you were to see it psychically, it looks like a circle that sits in the heart center. But if you were to have a better sense of it, it's actually more of a cross-section of a multidimensional structure shaped more like a vortex, right? Hence the name Vortex Healing. So it's like, wait, I need a prop, hold on. So if you were to see it from the front, right, it would look like a circle, right, the wheel. But the wheel itself is more just the cross-section of that larger structure that we describe more as a vortex. And this vortex structure, this energetic consciousness structure, becomes a bridge. In a way, it's the way that the divine creates a focus in your system so that you can access it in a particular way. And then it also becomes the bridge for the energetic and consciousness tools that come through. And those tools are numerous. So on an energetic level, tools that address the conditioning as it sits in the physical body in the form, you get over 49 different flavors of energy that come through this vortex healing wheel. Flavors that do different things. There are different kinds of energies that address different tissues in the physical body, right? They nurture and energize and help release different kinds of tissue in the physical body. There is a particular energy that's very hot that is incredibly effective for burning out viruses and infections and all of that. As a matter of fact, vortex healing has a wonderful reputation for working with very difficult kinds of viruses, including COVID-19 and Lyme's disease and things like that. We have a number of medical people, doctors and nurses within the vortex healing lineage that are offering wonderful reports about how vortex healing supports the energy system and helps deal with these very difficult kinds of things. So we get different kinds of, we get a wonderful flavor of energy that's very good for quieting the mind. That is extraordinarily helpful. We also get a different kind of energy that comes in. It can be very cooling because certain kinds of inflammation responds well to heat. Other kinds of inflammation respond well to a cooling energy. So we have that. All of these different kinds of energies come through the vortex wheel to address conditioning wherever and however it sits in the body, in the human energy system. But before you start to get concerned that this may be complicated to use, another key part of vortex healing is the consciousness component that comes in. Through the wheel, there is an essence of divine magic that comes through and addresses that part of the issue that we identify with, right? When I was talking about an issue, that part of you that says, I am anxious, I am depressed, I am in pain, right? The consciousness component of vortex healing comes in and it meets you there, right? It almost dialogues with this consciousness of separation, meaning the part of you that believes it is this experience of anxiety and depression. The consciousness component, this divine consciousness comes in and meets you where you are and says, really? You don't look like that. You look like your divinity in form. And the consciousness component comes in and helps wake that issue up out of the story. And that's where the healing comes together. The energetic tools and the consciousness tools come together seamlessly in a very beautiful way to meet that issue wherever, however it sits in the system and helps you to be free. So that's the nature of how that foundational transmission works. That class also offers a number of different ways of working. We can work on ourselves from the foundational level training. You can also work on others. You are able to work at a distance, right? So it's not several layer or levels of training that you need to be able to work at a distance. Right from our foundational training, you can do that. And there's also a lot of magic in this lineage, right? This is a lineage about the Merlin lineage. I want to talk about that in a minute, but we are able to do a lot of amazing things about clearing spaces and clearing food because the essence of this divine consciousness is magical. So let me talk a little bit about Merlin and magic and what that means. So the confusion comes in where we talk about Merlin, and as soon as we talk about Merlin, you have this idea that Merlin is the figure that we think of from Camelot, of the wizard with the hat and the wand and the beard and all of that. And it's important to understand that when I'm talking about Merlin and I'm talking about magic, I'm not talking about that person or any individual, actually. I'm talking about a divine expression, right? Magic is by nature just bigger than ourselves. You know, those moments we have when there's some kind of coincidence, or we're reminded of something, or someone comes from out of the blue to share something with us, or we experience something that's just so amazing, we know it has to be bigger than ourselves. That's magic. Those moments when the absolute unknowable touches us in such an intimate level is amazing. How did that happen? That's magic. And the essence of vortex healing in this lineage is a magical one. The history of this lineage goes back to India about 5,600 years ago. And at that time, there was what we call an avatar, right? An avatar has become sort of a pop culture term. An avatar has come to mean kind of a projection of your consciousness into another space. Like, remember the movie, the James Cameron movie? The avatar, the big blue figure, was a projection of the guy who was in the wheelchair, his consciousness into another form, right? Video games, you have an avatar. It's when you control the little figure on the screen to be a rogue elf, right? So that's sort of the pop culture meaning. But the more traditional word avatar, it's really more like divine presence and consciousness expressing itself through form on earth to meet us where we need to be met. So Christ, for example, is probably the most famous Western avatar. You know, when I was growing up, sort of Catholic, I never really understood how Christ could be the Father and the Son. That never really made sense to me. But in the context of avatars, it makes perfect sense, right? How the absolute divinity that is everything can create a kind of focus, right? To meet people, sort of come in and meet us in a very personal way from a deep place of service, to touch us in that place and to help us where we need it the most. That's an avatar. You know, Christ was a teacher, and he was able to do that in that way. An example of a modern day avatar would be Amachi, the hugging saint. You know, she has a wonderful divine mother quality that comes in. And in this lineage, 5,600 years ago, there was an avatar who was able to express the flavor of magical transformation, right? And when the form died, as forms do, that divine consciousness presence is not lost, of course. And when that bridged back into human consciousness later in history, 753 BC in England, that divine consciousness took the name of Merlin, because that was the word in the language at the time that could communicate the essence of this lineage, which was divine transformation. So at that time, there was an individual who was doing meditation, a karmic being just like you and me, doing a meditation. And when this divine consciousness reached into his own consciousness, he had an awakening. He was able to see outside of himself, right? And he became the first Merlin. He took the title of Merlin because it demonstrates that the work doesn't come from us, it comes through us. That's what it means to be a channel, right? The work doesn't come from us, it comes through us. And he became basically the first vortex healing teacher, taking the title of Merlin. And the lineage was passed down throughout history. And now it still exists in modern day. Our founder is Rick Weinman, and we have teachers who teach all over the world. There are 6 of us. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but we get around. You know, I am your East Coast teacher. You know, I teach in New York and Boston, Toronto, Virginia. We have a teacher on the West Coast. We have a teacher in London and Holland and Australia, in Finland. And it seems to be catching on, more popular than ever, because it seems that the world is interested in not only healing, but awakening, right? Because as we begin to work on our issues, right, and we begin to, you know, get that depression out of the way and that anxiety out of the way and physical pain out of the way, and we realize I am not this and I am not my pain and I am not my loneliness, the deeper question begins to arise, well, if I'm not all of that, then what am I, right? And that's where the deepest healing comes in, which is the realization of what you have always been, the return to wholeness that I was talking about in the beginning. So as I talk about vortex healing and I demonstrate it, it functions as a healing modality. It is something that you can study. It is something that you learn through transmission. It's something that you work on yourself. It's something you work on others. But to describe it in integrity, it's really a lineage about awakening. And as we begin to clear the decks of the things that make us suffer, right? And that's where we suffer, is our identification with our issues, not even the issues themselves, but our identification with them. And as we lose that, then we are free to really experience the truth of what we are, which is the wholeness, the one, right? And that's when the it's all one is no longer just a story, it's the experience of the true self. So the deepest healing is the awakening, and of course the awakening becomes the deepest healing. And so that's really what we're talking about when we're talking about vortex healing. And there just seems to be an interest, you know, the world seems to want to wake up. These are difficult times. These are scary times, you know, and a lot of us have issues in our faces. But again, it's an opportunity for the world to come together in a way we've just never been able to do before, if we are ready to drop our stories, drop ourselves, and seek that deeper healing. So for more information about vortex healing, you can go to the main Vortex Healing website, vortexhealing.org. For programs and classes in this area, you can come to my website, LorraineGoldbloom.com. And there you can see the list of foundational classes that are going to be offered. I do have one scheduled to happen at the New York Open Center, July 22nd through 26th. That may not happen. That may not happen. That may need to be rescheduled, but that's okay. We will reschedule it. We will be back. There is an interest. I will be doing more classes in October, both in New York and in Dedham, Massachusetts. We're around, and in the meantime, please stay tuned. I do offer events on my website, on my Facebook page. Some are free, some are paid events. I do offer sessions on supporting the immune system. And by the way, there is a wonderful video on the Vortex Healing website about a meditation led by Rick Weinman about how to support your immune system. Again, this is something that Vortex Healing does very effectively, works very well with the physical body or parts of the physical energetic system, as well as working on issues. We can also bring in a quality, right? The divine quality of compassion or inner freedom or magical transformation. You know, the nature of surrender asks us to let go to something greater than ourselves, right? When we can let go to the divine presence that's already there, then we can really be free. So anyway, I've been rattling on. I think that's it. I've really enjoyed this time with you. So please stay in touch with me, LorraineGoldbloom.com, VortexHealing.org, and I hope to talk with you more soon. So take care, everyone. Please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we will be